All right, here we are, episode 6, back with Josh and Mike, the professor and the big scary guy, Josh. I'm Ray
Yep.
Dietrich. What's up?
What's up? What's up? What up? What up?
So today we have a topic. Ladies and gentlemen, right? Like a little
Popular
bit
topic.
different game. Like I'm the average guy. I'm like the general population dude here with the science guys who know what they're doing. I'm the amateur, kind of just following blindly these guys what they tell me to do. So I am always like hitting up Josh and Mike and asking questions like, what do you think about this? Because I'll hear something on a podcast or I'll read an article or I'll be in MyFitnessPal and a stupid blog post pops up. Like there is so much nonsense out there. So I have clear questions for you guys today. And we are going to talk about intermittent fasting, fasted cardio, all the rage that, and look, man, you're going to have to I've seen the science. I've seen some of the articles you guys have dropped, so I kind of know where this is probably going to go.
Mhm.
But I'm going to ask regular guy questions because if I'm not sitting here talking to people who are educated on this factor, everyone else is on board, right? Is that
Sure.
safe to say? It's like a trend. Like people all over the place are all over this thing. So let's start with this. Like, what is IF? Is that exactly, you hear fasted cardio as a term all the time. So is that one and the same? And what is intermittent fasting and how does it work? So whoever wants to tackle that, or if you want to do it as a group, let's
Yeah,
start.
I mean, we can do it as a group. So intermittent fasting obviously is you're giving yourself to break it down very simple. You're giving yourself usually, from what I've seen, an 8-hour window of eating your calories a day. So it's a 16-hour fast with an 8-hour window to eat your calories, right? Some people are doing noon to 8. Some people are doing 10 to 6. But the concept is you get a certain amount of time to eat your calories. And you'll hear people say it has a hormonal benefit. It has a digestion benefit.
Dude, I read an article before this podcast that was talking about cancer in IF. I'm just like, you guys are
Yeah, sure, right. And the concept is that it has all these health benefits. You get the health benefits of a fasting. You get the health benefits of hormonal balance, digestion, all kinds of stuff like that. That's my 1.0 explanation. Mike probably can get into the science of what people are actually saying intermittent fasting is supposed to do or what it does or what it doesn't do. So he can probably add on top of that.
Sure.
Yeah, I mean, for the most part, intermittent fasting is just basically a time-restricted form of eating. And so for the folks who aren't familiar with it, as Josh mentioned, there's these eating windows. Most people do like 16 and 8, 16 fasted, 8 fed. Other people do 20 and 4, and they close that eating window down a little bit. Some of the idea is that it increases dietary adherence for some folks. And so if they tend to overeat at breakfast, or they just tend to be the type of people who say, you know, it's all or nothing. If I don't have a good meal at breakfast and the day doesn't start out well, you know, whatever, screw it. I'm just not even going to do anything with regards to nutrition today. So if they eliminate that first meal, it kind of gives them a little bit more time to prepare and have a healthier lunch and then carry on that snowball effect throughout the day. And from a productivity standpoint, a lot of people say, well, I feel better mentally when I don't eat breakfast first thing in the morning. I'm more productive at work. And while this can be true, it's kind of a double-edged sword because when you first wake up in the morning, you naturally have a peak in this hormone called cortisol. And cortisol and melatonin are basically inversely proportional. So at night, melatonin is nice and high, cortisol is nice and low, and you fall asleep. And in the morning, though, those flip-flop. And so cortisol goes up to wake you up and melatonin comes down. So what happens is typically when cortisol is nice and high in the morning, it'll start to slowly come down throughout the day. But insulin, i.e. what gets released when you consume a carbohydrate or something like whey protein, that has a very anti-catabolic effect. And so that can actually help to bring down cortisol a little bit. So in terms of the good side of that, cortisol is very, very helpful for giving you that like tunnel vision. I got to stay focused, fight or flight, sympathetic side of the equation. So you get very productive and you get very honed in on what you're doing. However, if somebody's already stressed out and underslept on the other side of the equation, and then you add on top of that something like intermittent fasting and say, well, just don't eat your first meal, push all your calories back until lunchtime, then they say, wow, I feel great mentally. But then as soon as I eat lunch around 2 o'clock or 3 o'clock, I get this huge dip in energy and I feel like I want to take a nap right after I eat. What's the deal with that? Well, for one thing, now you've just shifted yourself back to a parasympathetic state. And anytime we eat, naturally that should occur. But the fact is you've been running, your RPMs all the way up in the red zone for the first half of the day. And now you've shifted back into parasympathetic where you should be cruising along for most of the day, unless you're working out or, you just got cut off in traffic or something like that. So it kind of feeds into that normal American lifestyle of being overstressed, but highly productive at the same time. So it's a double-edged sword, and you have to be careful, which is where some coaches run into issues, just assuming, hey, all my clients can go through this intermittent fasting window. We're going to push all the square pegs through a round hole.
Yeah.
And that's definitely not the case, especially when you have, females, for example, if they're already dealing with hormonal issues, menstrual issues, any sort of other, endocrine side effects of their lifestyle, or perhaps too much training or too little sleep, or a combination of all these. It's something called the female athlete triad. And so that's just basically where a female will experience changes in her bone mineral density, her menses, and then also kind of her metabolic status. And so we have this huge kind of conundrum going on all at the same time. And that's where intermittent fasting is a little bit more precarious, especially for a female population.
Well, I agree.
Hey, that is why we call you the professor, and I love that answer. Thank you.
No, and well, that you bring up a really good point. So we get a lot of anecdotal evidence, or who's the big jacked up dude that went all over the place? Big, huge, jacked up black dude that moves like a robot. He's a big, funny guy. God dang it. I can't remember. I should have done my research. But you get a guy like him who's big and jacked up, and he goes on Larry King Live and talks about intermittent fasting makes me feel good.
Terry Crews.
Yes. Terry Crews. Phenomenal dude. Hilarious.
Yeah.
Probably don't want to take my nutrition advice from him. Genetic.
Well, right? and if you're a Joe Rogan podcast fan, everyone on there is on that train, and they talk about it on almost every episode. So for someone like me, I'm just like, Joe knows his shit usually in nutrition. He's got pro fighters on there every other day. So it's like, okay, well, what is this all about, right? But it kind of sounds like from what Mike's saying, it's the whole I want to skip lunch because it makes me feel like shit is probably because your food is terrible.
Well, here's what happens. You get people say, wait, I have a hard time eating breakfast. You mean I can sleep in 30 minutes later and not have to eat breakfast and get healthy? I'm in. Right? So it appeals to their, I don't have to eat breakfast, right? Then you see Terry Crews, he loves it. But here's what happens. I got an instant message from a girl who said, hey, I have hypothyroidism. I want to do low carb and get on intermittent fasting because I heard it can help me have energy. And I'm like, pump the brakes, right? You're like, whoa, this is not, I read on a podcast that somebody did intermittent fasting and they feel great. Now that leads to somebody's desperation, right? She's probably overweight, thyroid shot. She's desperate to feel better.
Right.
And then she hears somebody did low carb and intermittent fasting and they have energy. And then she goes, well, I have low energy. Now I'm going to do
the problem, right? Like the problem is food, sleep, movement. And then they want to go to IF, just to fix it all. It kind of seems like that's the trend. It's like, oh, latch onto the fad, forget about the building blocks.
Sure. And here's what I get. I get people, what's the macronutrient everybody has a hard time in our group getting?
Protein.
Because you got to figure it out, right?
Yeah. Took a while.
You hear people, like there's a woman that needed 130 grams of protein. She's doing intermittent fasting. At the end of the day, she has 80.
Don't intermittent fast.
Don't intermittent fast. You don't have enough time to get your food. Like
Make Ray a coach. He's figuring it out.
Yeah. Ray just figured it out. Don't do it. Don't. If you're not getting your calories in, then why are you doing time-restricted dieting?
Right.
Then naturally, I think people with intermittent fast, they can't eat enough to get their calories in. So they're in a natural caloric deficit. Mike, your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, that's, if the foundation is just total calories for weight gain and weight loss, if somebody's main goal is to lose weight and they're not hitting the protein intake, that's, the foundation. Absolutely, we always have to return to that. And the other thing that people like to use intermittent fasting for is almost a confirmation bias for their crappy lifestyle. So
Yes.
if you're going to bed super late and then you're having a tough time waking up in the morning because you're a slow starter, and then you want to slam, a double venti espresso from Starbucks and just skip breakfast because you don't have time because you can't get out of bed in the morning, well, then we got to roll back about 16 hours prior to what you did before you went to sleep, what time you went to sleep, and then why you can't get up early in the morning to kind of get that snowball effect started. So as I've mentioned in another video in the group, really setting yourself up for sleep at night really starts the first thing you do in the morning. And so that's really where the whole cascade starts. So with intermittent fasting, that can either aid in or reduce your ability to allow that snowball to form. So a lot of people also find with intermittent fasting, they like to jump on the longevity train. And that's kind of what you mentioned with the cancer research, where there is some very small window of research coming out showing that there may be some beneficial adaptations to intermittent fasting through something called apoptosis. And basically what apoptosis is, it's basically your immune system's way of looking at all the cells in your body and then tagging ones that they're like, nope, that one looks a little funny, that one's mutating. We're going to tag it, and it's just basically self-programmed cell death. So the cell ruptures and pops, and then your body eliminates the threat, so to speak. And so during a period of fasting, apoptosis increases. And so the idea is that it's almost your body's cellular repair mechanism, where it kind of goes around, dusts the corners, sweeps the floors, cleans out all that cellular debris, so to speak. And that's a little bit higher during fasting. However, all of that research has not been conducted in humans. So the important thing to remember.
Oh, so it's in rats. Okay, gotcha.
Some of it's in monkeys, actually.
Well, and that's the whole thing. Like, I'm going to lead in my next question here, but what I'm hearing is, and correct me if I'm wrong, but if you have all of your things worked out, like your food, your sleep, your exercise, everything's on a good keel, there might be, for some people, a good use for IF. Right? Is that fair?
Maybe. But here's the thing that people forget with intermittent fasting. If you are doing everything else that we've already discussed in the group, so when I talk about sleep, I always tell people, hey, if you can, push your last meal about an hour and a half to 2 hours before you go to bed. Now, if most people are also following the sleep recommendations, what we're going to find is that most people are probably eating around 8 or 7:30 as their last meal, and then they're going to bed around 10 or 10:30. If you're sleeping till even 6 or 7, now we've essentially dropped in a 12 to a 13-hour fasting window automatically every single day.
Right.
So It's not like intermittent fasting has, all of a sudden come out of nowhere and we've never done it before. People are intrinsically doing this. If you talk to, like, when I talk to my grandparents or even, some older folks, any elderly people, most of them eat dinner at 5 o'clock and then don't eat breakfast until 7 or 8 a.m. the very next day.
Right.
We'll figure it out. That's basically the same fasting window as what people are doing with intermittent fasting now. But as a society, we slowly pushed eating back later and later and later. Now we have fast food establishments that stay open 24 hours a day. So now people eat later and later and later. And research is coming out now, which is showing that the later somebody eats, it actually can disrupt these peripheral clocks that we've talked about within the body that regulate a lot of these metabolic functions. So I always tell people, hey, if the sun is set and it's completely pitch dark outside and you're still hungry, maybe have a little snack, but don't eat a full meal, because most of the time, before we had all this electricity and light, people went to bed when the lights went out.
Right,
so they
that's
weren't
what
eating.
I was gonna say. Yeah.
It's intuitive, but now we have to call it intermittent fasting and now flip-flop the window where we're not eating during the day when we're most active, but then we eat all these calories at night. I've seen some people that save their eating window for the last 4 hours, 8 until 12 o'clock at midnight, and they eat for 4 hours straight, and then they go to sleep and they do it all again the next day. And most of these people in 4 or 5 years are going to end up with a lot of issues long-term that they don't relate back to their lifestyle previously. So that's the thing. Like, you always talk about how it seems like a lot of these things are pretty simple, but now we're having to get all this research confirmation and we're having to call it something different, when actually if people just ate, 3 square meals a day, book in pre-workout and post-workout with a little bit of nutrients, go to bed at a halfway decent time, don't binge watch Friends on Netflix for, 3 hours every single night.
Sure.
You're probably covering a lot of different fronts, and we don't have to go deep down the rabbit hole. We might tweak 1 or 2 things. You're good.
Well, if you're rolling back to that ancestor thing, 2,000 years ago, they probably slept when it was dark and ate when it was light, and they're IF 14 hours a day, whatever it is.
Yeah, it's like they weren't.
You talked about what was it? Autophagy cystosis. What'd you call that?
Apoptosis?
Yeah, and there's a word people are using. It's auto.
Autophagy?
Yeah, that word. You see it everywhere. Because every time someone talks about fasting, they talk about that, right? They talk about the fact that we can kill bad cells through fasting. Go ahead. Oh, go ahead.
I got. I'm gonna take this. I got this. Here we go.
What I was going to say is this. I said one of the things that sparked this conversation was I'm on Instagram, wasting my time at 11 o'clock at night on a blue screen when I should be sleeping, and so, there's a fashion blogger, 60,000 followers. All of a sudden, she's pumping information on intermittent fasting, and I'm like, and it has like 60 comments, and I'm just like, all right, this is the tipping point to where intermittent fasting has become the buzzword. We now have people that have no clue about anything to do with nutrition, hashtagging intermittent fasting IF, follow me for more info. And now they're intermittent fasting experts, right?
Hey man, just give someone an Instagram account. They're an expert, bro.
Sure. But
well, they think the only point of intermittent fasting is just changing when you eat. They don't look at any of the other variables. So if it's that simple, it's the same as nutrition and macros. Oh, well, I know numbers, so now I'm a macros coach.
Yeah.
Congrats, bro, but that's not nutrition.
Yeah. That's not, and we talk about that. Macros aren't education. Like,
sure,
let's learn how to eat real food. I had a girl reach out to me that used to do fitness competitions, and she's like, "Will you help me with some nutrition?" And I said, "Yeah, you probably know how to eat, know how to do that, know how to do all this." And she goes, "Actually, I don't. All my competitions, my coaches handed me a meal plan."
Wow.
And they said, eat this, and this. And it was weekly. I never learned anything. I never learned how to do it. When it said 4 ounces of sweet potato, 4 ounces of chicken, and a cup of broccoli, that's what I ate. Yeah. And I said, well, that's the difference between somebody knowing how to, she's never been educated, but she could probably put a picture of herself up and say, DM me for information on nutrition. And she'd probably get 100 DMs.
Yeah.
But
that's the difference in a coach and a teacher.
Sure. So, all right. So we got the basics idea of what intermittent fasting is. I think
we have that. And then I have 3 benefits that I did my research based upon what I've already seen and all the shit that's out there all over the internet. Sure. I've got 3 benefits, three talking points I've seen with this conversation that I want to, hey, is this legit or no, or sometimes or why kind of thing, right? So does intermittent fasting aid in digestion? And what I mean by that is, and this is like my dumb general pop understanding after watching tons of propaganda. So if I'm telling you what I think I know about this.
No, that's good because you're doing the same thing everybody else is doing.
These are the calls that I make Josh tonight. Hey bro, so what do you think about, you know what I mean? Like this is what this is. So based upon my crack research, I have possibly have an idea that if you do an intermittent fasting, and I'm talking for someone who has, like me personally, I literally do not deviate from what Josh gives me. Like if I come in low on my numbers, it's never protein. You know what I mean? Like it's pretty dialed on clean food, all of it, sleep. I'm there. So does IF give your system a chance to have better digestion because you have such a break in eating? That's kind of like one of the benefits that I've personally been looking for because, I'll go and do like sparring jujitsu in the mornings, like around 10 or 11 a.m. So for me, I'm like on those days, it's interesting for me to do, last meal 8 p.m. the night before and then go into a class at 10:30, 11 a.m. into 12 or so until I get home and eat, and not eat prior because digestion's done. Because the last thing you want to do is have digestion issues while you're sparring jujitsu. That is a nightmare, bro. So is that any kind of real benefit or like, and not just for that situation, but I've been sold that it helps your body rest, bro, and get to your body just to digest, not to just follow with food at all times. Like,
sure,
something like that. So that's kind of where I'm at. What do you think? What do you guys think?
Josh, you want it, or do you want me to take it?
Because that's actually complex.
Okay. It's pretty contextual because if we think about the conversation we just had regarding when you eat relative to your sleep, you're going to be getting a large break in digestion. But if we also think about this in terms of somebody who eats 3 square meals a day, 7, 12, and 5, we're going to have roughly a 4 to 5 hour gap in between both those meals. So if we summate the gaps between those meals and the gap that we have from sleep as well, it's going to roughly equate to the same amount of time as you would with intermittent fasting. The issue can be with intermittent fasting, as we talked about cortisol before. Cortisol is good because it helps drive the stress response, which is what we need for adaptation. But in the long term, if that stress response stays nice and high, what happens is your GI tract, all the blood gets shunted away to the working muscle. And so this naturally happens when you start to work out. And this is good because then all of the blood within your system gets pushed to those muscles which need delivery of oxygen, removal of byproducts, and delivery of nutrients. But this will essentially shut down digestion entirely. So naturally, during the course of the night, we get something called peristalsis, where it's rhythmic contraction of your intestines, which moves food along and then digests it. If we are constantly running that stress response, peristalsis is in the tube, it's not happening. And if cortisol is always nice and high, that will also shut down digestion and will slow digestion because we have shifted out of parasympathetic entirely into sympathetic. So it will give your digestive system a break because there is no food actively coming in. But the thing to remember is that your digestive system is very good at, we'll call it detoxifying, just eliminating and removing those compounds and those fibers that you can't digest and then pushing them out of your body. This is good and this is important. Peristalsis gets stimulated anytime we eat. So if you're not eating and peristalsis isn't happening, and you're somebody who's already chronically stressed out, more sympathetic dominant, high cortisol, you might be borderline constipation. And so again, as we talked about in our last podcast on sleep, if somebody wants to figure this out, you can take 1 tablespoon of sesame seeds, don't chew them, just swallow them in a glass of water, see how long it takes to get through your system. If you're pushing maybe 72 hours, 3 days, something like that, you might be a little constipated. Again, when you swallow the seeds, it's not to say that they're just going to sit in your stomach for 3 days. They're slowly going to work their way through your digestive system. But as a general rule of thumb, somebody should be moving their digestive system about once every 24 hours. Twice is fine too, especially if you're eating more food. Some people even get peristalsis and the movement of their GI system with every single meal. That's perfectly normal. But if you are, again, pushing that window back further and further and further, you may be shifting what's called your autonomic tone, which is basically the difference in your sympathetic and parasympathetic systems. And you might be shifting it entirely to sympathetic, when in actuality, we might want to be hovering in between when we're trying to be productive at work. But when we're eating, we want to be totally parasympathetic. Similarly, when we're training, we want to be totally sympathetic. So we have to be careful in that if we assume that automatically digestion will improve because of this fasting, it can. And don't get me wrong, I've seen some interesting research on the immune system and almost quote unquote resetting the immune system after a 72-hour fast because of this autophagy as well as the GI benefits. So how can somebody know if it's a good choice for them? One, if your sleep isn't too disrupted, if you're sleeping all right now, 8 hours, fairly moderate to decent sleep, you don't wake up a whole ton through the night, you're not waking up multiple times to use the restroom, that's a pretty big giveaway that you're pretty sympathetic dominant. If your blood pressure's within range, I would say normal, less than 120/80, you're not pre-hypertensive, 130/90, anything like that where you're borderline, your body's just running a little hotter than normal, so to speak, that would be an issue where you might want to avoid intermittent fasting. So can you get digestive benefits? Sure. And somebody may want to play around with that depending upon their GI tract. But if you're a slow starter in the morning, if you're somebody who heavily relies on caffeine to get going, if you've had adrenal issues or autonomic issues in the past, if you've got any sort of constipation, or if somebody is familiar with the vagus nerve or vagal tone, which is just basically that autonomic tone that we talked about. Sometimes people will have issues with stimulating their vagus nerve and getting more parasympathetic. If any of those things are you've ever had an issue and talked to your doctor about this, intermittent fasting is probably not the way you want to go.
So any symptoms of high stress.
Yeah, at least not routinely. Yeah.
Okay.
And I should say that this is just a conversation about intermittent fasting. So this is fasting on a daily basis. This is not a conversation about singular fast once a month or once every 2 weeks, where those actually can have a little bit more of a benefit and be less stress on the system.
You just blew Ray's mind because we just had this conversation yesterday. Ray's smiling right now. I can see it.
We're going to get into that on the next episode. I'm just saying.
Yeah. We're getting into that. So we're getting into that soon. But I guess, okay. Yeah.
So this is only about fasting on a daily basis, which will drive that stress response, not on a singular 24-hour fast, which could, in context, be good for somebody who is, super sedentary, always responds to the need for food, doesn't really understand the difference between psychological hunger and physiological hunger, aka they just feel hungry versus when they actually need food for their body. That's very important to be able to differentiate those
craving versus hunger. Is there a difference between cravings versus hunger?
Well, both could be a symptom of hunger, but typically hunger is when food has moved out of your stomach and into your GI tract. And typically cravings are when you just want a specific food by itself.
Gotcha.
So a craving could be like you've eaten dinner and you feel full, but now intrinsically, you're going to get a huge dopamine rush if you have that slice of chocolate cake. So you're really full and you don't really think you can eat that slice of chocolate cake, but you do anyway. That's a craving.
Yeah, I got you.
What a great answer, by the way.
I know that's.
Thanks.
I've seen you in the group when people talk about intermittent, and dude, I feel like everybody and their mom has a downloadable version of your guide to intermittent fasting.
It's so crazy hot right now. I don't know how that happened. It really is. It's everywhere.
But why is that?
What's that?
Why is that?
People are looking for another way to lose weight without knowing what the hell they're doing. That's why.
and everybody, the society as a whole, everybody is trying to get faster and more productive and do
less,
as much as possible in the least amount of time. That's why we have companies like this Soylent drink. It's entirely soy-based protein.
Dude, I thought you were going to kill that guy when he posted. Dude, that guy posted that on our page. He's like, I just do the Soylent. And I'm almost just like, I'm doing the countdown. 5, 4.
Here comes Mike.
Here comes Mike, because this is good. Yeah, Mike's just, first of all, Mike probably wanted to break his computer first. You know what I'm saying? Because I didn't even want to touch it. I was just like, I'm just gonna.
I had to get a life-proof case on my phone for comments like that, just in case I needed to throw it.
All right, 2 more questions. Josh, we'll kick this one to you first. So I'm gonna put Josh on the spot.
Okay.
This is in caveman language, bro. So I don't think you have to go deep down the science rabbit hole. So, all right. So another thing you hear about a lot, right, is obviously keto is a big fad diet that has great benefits for some people.
Sure.
Like ketosis, ketones, keto is a great thing for some people, right? So that's not even the debate. But does I've heard that it helps you stay in ketosis. I've heard it helps you get in ketosis. What's the benefits for there as far as, there's people that'll say it'll kickstart you into keto faster, into actual ketosis, because of the IF and blah, 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 fasted cardio, bro. You know what I'm saying? So what are there any benefits connecting, getting in or maintaining the state of ketosis with IF-ish?
My caveman answer to that, if somebody came to me and says, I'm going to do IF keto, I'd be like, man, you just dropped a lot of hashtags on me, right? And I was just like, you just dropped a lot of
buzzwords.
Yeah, a lot of buzzwords. Mike could probably build the science on top of that, but my concept for them would be it'd be a compliance thing for them to start. We all know that most diets fail because people don't comply, right?
And I'll just throw out, that's my next and last question. If you want to combo that up, it's, does IF work for weight loss in itself, or is it a compliance tool? So
I think it's I think intermittent fasting is a compliance tool. I think if people can eat less calories in a short amount of time and it's easier for them and they can still get the nutrients that they have, then okay, I can understand. And they don't have this the daily stress of the high cortisol levels, right? If they literally are laid back, chill, it's not going to stress them out. Their personality, their job, their work, their sleep's on point, everything's good, and they want to do intermittent fasting from a compliance side, I could work with that person. right? I could work with that person. Now I'd want to educate them on the good and the bad side of it, right? Like, hey, if you're going to do this, understand, yes, it could be a compliance tool, but understand that this could affect other things that maybe you're not aware of, right? That you can do. My first comment to somebody like that would be intermittent fasting along with like any kind of diet. I don't care if it's just a low carb or just a calorie restricted diet. My first thing with somebody would be to use it as a compliance tool. That is it. Does it help somebody get into?
Now, for general people speak, you're saying that because they're overeating and this cuts their eating window, and that's the reason for the compliance, essentially?
Yes. They got less time to eat more food. They're naturally going to eat less calories. As long as they're getting in their protein intake, I could see it being a compliance tool for somebody. And, you know, if you're talking to somebody that's like,
and does that relate to ketosis as well, or is that you're going a different way?
So you're saying would just doing intermittent fasting itself, along with the keto diet, get somebody into ketosis?
Yes, because I've you know, the experts, the hashtag experts or quote mark experts, they'll tell you that it's easier to get in and maintain it because of IF.
Are they saying from a hormonal side or a compliance?
I have no. They're not saying shit, bro. They just say those words. You know what I mean? Like,
I would have. Okay.
It's good, bro.
I would say they're saying that my guess, and I'm not, and I'm out front with everybody. I'm not a keto expert, right?
Sure.
I've been into ketosis before. I get it. I see value in things like ketones, but I'm not a keto expert. Most people that come to me and want to do keto diet, I kind of push them to somebody else, to be honest with you, because I'm not the expert. But my first thought process would say you get in it quicker and you can stay in it strictly from a compliance side. Do you have any thoughts on that, Mike?
I mean, yeah, fasting will push you into ketosis because when you fast, you have to go through stored glycogen or stored glucose, carbohydrates in your liver first.
Yes.
Once you do that, you'll push into muscle glycogen.
Yep.
And then once you get through most of muscle glycogen, then you'll push into adipocytes, the fat stores.
Now, is that a fast, like a 24-hour fast, or are you still talking about intermittent fasting?
I'm not sure.
How long does that take?
So to actually get into ketosis, I'm not sure of a hard and fast number, but I will tell you that obviously if you're not consuming carbohydrates and your body is burning through those carbohydrates, that will push you into ketosis faster. You will also see ketosis pop up for any sort of individuals that are training for a really, really long time, especially like marathon runners or like that's an extreme case, but they're going to get into ketosis because they will essentially burn through liver glycogen, muscle glycogen, and then they're left with obviously the fat storage. So can it help you get into ketosis? Yeah, sure. And if somebody wants to do both, it would be a question of which have they already mastered. And if they haven't mastered either of them, then I would say don't try to do both all at once, because this is the equivalent to somebody trying to learn, organic chemistry, but they've never taken Chem 1 and 2 in college. So they've never had the foundation level and they just want to jump to expert. And it's probably not going to work out too well. But the question with this whole discussion of intermittent fasting, ketosis, all of it, the thing we always have to keep in the back of our mind is, what is the primary goal with our nutrition structure? Is the goal to enhance these biochemical pathways that are in the textbook supposedly supposed to enhance our fat loss efficiency, or is the goal to enhance our performance and the amount of work output we can do during the training session? Because this kind of ties in the fasted cardio discussion as well as the intermittent fasting discussion. If you want to enter into a training session fasted, which a lot of people do with intermittent fasting, or they want to stay in ketosis and go through their workout by being fasted, then you will probably limit, one, the amount of workload you can handle during the session, and you will hypothetically limit also your ability to recover and train with a higher frequency. I'm not aware of anybody on a keto diet who's training twice a day, multiple days per week, and still able to recover from that. Mm-hmm. I'm still waiting to see what CrossFitter wins the 2019 CrossFit Games on a keto diet.
Sure. Yeah.
I haven't seen it yet, but again, can the keto diet work really well for a lot of people? Sure can. But my mindset and maybe this is shaped by more of the athletic teams that I've worked with, but my mindset when I work with people is I always tell you, we want you to focus on your performance. What's going to help you perform your best and stay at that top level in terms of recovering and adding and aiding in your lifestyle. For most people, they're probably going to feel a little bit better when they have something in their system when they train. Now, could that be something like exogenous ketones or caffeine? Maybe for some people that works really well for them. And if that's what they like to do, placebo is great. Maybe they get an actual performance benefit from it, even better. But if that's what they've been rolling with and that's what they like, stick with it. But if people are open to it, then I would say if they want to roll with a little something before training, it might feel a little bit better than if they're fasting.
So good.
And that's fast. The fasted cardio thing was the last thing I was going to talk about. So that's perfect. If you guys want to keep on this path, it's great because that's the other big bro thing out there.
Yeah. I'm not all for it. I don't buy it. I mean, that's kind of like my short end of the stick is I think still total calories in, total calories out matters more. I understand when people say, I think fasted cardio is one of those things that people say in theory this should happen, but then in practicality it doesn't happen, right? Like in theory, you work out and do cardio first thing in the morning, glycogen is low, we should break into fat stores. That's kind of like, well, that makes sense. But then in practice, I don't think we see it. Now, I will tell people this. If you want to get extra cardio in, and it's your best time to do that is first thing in the morning, because once your day starts, you can't do it, and that's when you want to do it, then do it. That's fine. But don't expect anything magical strictly because it's fasted cardio. It's just cardio.
Well, I was thinking back into when I was in the Army, and every fucking day we woke up and did fasted cardio. You know what I mean? Like we got out and we ran 10 miles. And
yeah.
So it can be done. I'm sure that they don't care. Back in the 90s, they didn't even know about nutrition in the U.S. Army. I'm sure they don't care about it much more now. But it's interesting how something can take a fad like, fasted cardio. That's like a hot topic in nutrition and fitness. And really, okay, so what are we talking about? Fasted cardio. Okay, so we're working out before we're eating in the morning. Like that's the big thing that's the big shocker in the industry right now. We're eating out or we're working out before breakfast. Like that's the big shocker, right? Like,
yeah. I think for a majority of people, getting the extra quality of sleep and then controlling their calorie intake during the day, the positives of that extra recovery, sleep, less stress, to me is more important to the general population people than the zombie cardio at 5 o'clock in the morning before they go to work at 8 o'clock.
Dude, and for me, like me personally, like, dude, if I don't have some kind of calories in me before I go like train jujitsu, good luck, man. That's and the red line that you're hitting in that, like in sparring, it's pretty intense. And usually what I'll do is I won't eat those mornings, but I'll just sip on like a protein shake. I'll take a couple scoops of protein and just sip on that a few hours prior.
Sure.
That's not eating. That's not fasted, but I couldn't imagine going in with absolutely no calories, nothing before a training session like that. For real.
I couldn't imagine doing intermittent fasting. I couldn't imagine only eating from noon to 8 or 10 to 6. I don't. And so you bring up a good point, and I think Mike brought it up. I've met so many people who do intermittent fasting that their main goal is just accomplishing intermittent fasting.
Yeah.
It's like MMA fighters, where you ever see the MMA fighter who only worried about cutting weight and making weight. He forgot about training for the fight.
Yeah.
So he just gets brutalized in the fight because he was so excited to cut weight and make weight. I met so many people that are so excited that they can do and can handle intermittent fasting that they forget about what their goals are, what their goals are, and their nutritional requirements for the day, because they become so hardcore focused on just intermittent. And you see this with keto too, right? How many times have you seen people who are so focused on only getting 5% of their calories from carbohydrates and doing a keto diet, they forget about the fact that they're supposed to be doing it for a purpose.
Well, and you see what they actually consume as a keto diet, and it's horrible. Like if they finger that food, dude.
Right, they're in a caloric surplus.
Yeah,
right? So,
dude, I remember like in the late 90s when Atkins was flying.
Yeah.
And literally people thought that you could eat as much protein and fat as you want, like unlimited. There would be guys like with chicken wings just piled and just all day, just eating. They would overeat but have no carbs and think that was a good lifestyle, man. Everyone was just shoveling cheese.
That's where you bring up the satiety of the food, right? Like eating carbs and fat, eating proteins and fats fill you faster. So I think a lot of people who go into a keto diet will consume less carbs because they're full from the foods that they're eating, right? The types of foods that they're eating are making them feel full. So, you know, naturally they might be in a caloric deficit. So what's the real purpose here? The caloric deficit, right? Is the reason is the caloric deficit. It's whatever you can comply to the longest. I get nervous when people come to me and say they want to do intermittent fasting and keto at the same time, because I don't think they're ready for the stress that'll put on the body. And I don't think it's going to improve the quality of their life. They just read an article and they're thinking, I'm going to, like Mike said, I'm going to go straight to trigonometry before I had math.
Well, yeah. I mean, I want to do IF and keto. Okay, cool. So you want to lose weight. Well, how about you start with good food and sleep? I don't know.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, let's not forget that, like, there is a large psychological component to all of these diets. It's not just physiological. So somebody says, well, you know, intermittent fasting has proven to increase human longevity. Well, that's great, but I've also worked with a lot of people who have legitimate eating disorders because of intermittent fasting, where they think,
100%.
oh, I'm just going to shorten my window to 6 hours, and I just love that feeling of being full, so I'm going to eat as much food as possible in that 6-hour window and literally gorge myself every single day so that I can go to bed just feeling full.
That's not a healthy relationship with food.
Sounds horrible.
Bro, that is a legit eating disorder, but you call it intermittent fasting.
So I called out somebody in our group, going back and forth with me on message. And I said, she goes, well, what do you think about that? I said, it must have been one of those days where it's like grumpy Josh, right? And I was like, my DM back was, sounds like you need to get a better develop a better relationship with food. And her prompt comment back to me literally was, oh, well, I just think you need, I just didn't want to maybe that wasn't the empathy she needed.
How about you learn how to walk before you run, right? Like, that's where we're at.
Maybe it wasn't the empathy she needed at that time. That probably could be a real jerk thing to say to somebody, but I'd gone back with her for about 3 days, and my final comment was, you don't have a healthy relationship with your food intake. I said, this is dysfunctional. You're keto IFing carb load. I mean, you're just, you don't have, and the reason that came up was I gave her some tips to do. And she goes, well, I got on the scale yesterday, I was 131. I got on the scale today, I was 132.
Oh,
Did you drink a cup of water before you ate in?
Yeah, I'm looking at my relationship, my thing. I'm like, oh my gosh, I don't even have the time to reply to this. Like, this is an hour and a half conversation of, I told you not to get on the scale for 21 days. So you got on the scale the next day. Now you're not compliant. Now
I never look at the damn scale. I swing like 7 pounds a day sometimes. Like, what good is the scale going to do, right?
See, but here's the thing is, like, the average layperson isn't seeing what's going on here. And what we're finding is now we have moved from the trend of the 90s, you got to eat 6 meals a day, to now we have swung in the entirely opposite direction of you only have to eat 1 meal a day because science says, bro, I can digest all that protein in one sitting. Well, that's fantastic. But what we're seeing now is that we have swung to the opposite end of the pendulum. And ideally, we want to be someplace in the middle. 3-4 meals a day, you're probably going to be sitting at a pretty decent level of not only fuel, but also frequency to fuel a workout if you're an average individual. And so everybody wants to take these extreme absolute examples and apply them as a general recommendation for the layperson. And it's just not going to work for everybody. And so what we're finding now is we have to find this medium somewhere where we're not entirely intermittent fasting. We're not 8 meals a day like the bodybuilding world, but we have to remember that with everything, there's probably going to be this nice little healthy balance that most people are going to want to stay in, provided they're not, training for a competition or, again, that absolute or extreme example. So we're just seeing this pendulum shift again, and it'll probably swing back in the opposite direction eventually. We're just right now at the entirely opposite end of that spectrum, and most people don't realize that.
Yeah, you know, people came to me a lot and would be like, well, do you eat 6 meals a day? Because, and this is when I was gaining all that weight, right? Do you eat 6 meals a day because that speeds up your metabolism? I said, no, because there's no way I'm getting 4,000 calories a day in 3 meals.
Yeah, seriously. I'm at 2,200 and I struggle in 3 meals. Dude, what are you talking about? 4,000.
Yeah. But you are bringing up a good point, Mike. There's a friend of mine always said, if we wanted to start a big weight loss clinic and we wanted to employ 10 people, he goes, I would have 1 trainer, 1 nutritionist, and 8 people that dealt in like human psychology. He goes, mental health, behavior changing type people. You need a fitness trainer and a nutritionist and like 8 people that deal with mental health, because I would never recommend somebody who comes to me and says, hey, I previously had an eating disorder. I'm going to start keto and IF. You got the same problem here now. You got the same thing. You got the same issue here. You've never developed a healthy relationship with food. And I'm saying that from somebody who personally in the history has always struggled with a healthy relationship with food. I've always been bulking or I've been cutting. It isn't until recently I'm like, I'm at a healthy place where I'm making moderate changes. I'm not shredded. I'm not fat, but I'm in that happy medium place where, I could eat something off the grid and be cool with it. Right. And not a lot of people are at that point that really follow nutrition or wellness or want to get healthy, get to that point. Now we're talking about a higher level of person. Most people don't know anything and they just want to get healthier, lose a little bit of weight. Maybe the doctor said you're going to be diabetic in a couple of years, or they want to get off their blood pressure medication, right? So you start from the whole scratch of just making better decisions over time. And the mental side of what we're talking about, I think if you really push any kind of elimination diet where you're eliminating certain foods, or if you're doing time restricted eating, if that person has any issue in the past with an unhealthy relationship with their body, their diet, their food, I think you're adding to the problem. I mean, would you say so, Mike? Would you say you're not helping that person really? You're not educating.
It's not a question of if, but
and
when
Mike,
something's
you
going
can
to
close
happen.
this out, bud.
What's that?
You can close this out. So go ahead.
Oh, okay. So,
or Mike can. Either way.
Yeah, Mike. Yeah, Mike, close out this whole thing. Like, if someone was watching this and had an interest in IF, and you wanted to say, this is where it could be good for you, and this is where it could be bad for you. Maybe two reasons somebody would or wouldn't do intermittent fasting so they can get educated here. What would your thought process be?
Intermittent fasting is like adding a spoiler on your car. It looks really cool. And if you're going 150 miles an hour because you're a high performance athlete, it might actually help enhance some of that downward drag force on the car. But if you're the average person who's tooling around in a 97 Kia and you toss a spoiler on the back, it's probably not going to do anything for your performance.
Yeah.
So long story short, unless you have all those foundational components, so if we think about a car, unless we have the engine upgrades, unless we have the body kit, everything going on that car, then that spoiler really isn't going to make a big difference. Those foundational components are the things we already talked about in the group. We don't address things like digestive health, from food intolerances to food hygiene, like how your environment is shaped and where you're eating, how you're chewing your food, sleep hygiene, when you're going to bed, what's your light exposure like. From a training standpoint, do we have enough stress on the system? So are we actually training hard enough to adapt and create a change? Or are we training too hard that we're actually causing the body to maladapt? And then finally, we get to nutrition. Are we fueled enough? Do we just have that baseline of calories? Are we able to establish a normal pattern, a normal frequency of eating that we can get in enough calories, enough protein, that all the nutrients are well distributed around the workout window? Because that's the most important part of the day if we're trying to stimulate body composition changes. So if somebody has this mindset, I'm going to go intermittent fasting, but that's their entire focus of their lifestyle, but they say, I really have a body composition goal and I think I'm going to get there with intermittent fasting, but I'm going to fast through my whole workout. Well, the workout is what's going to generate most of the changes in the body composition. So ideally, we want to put as many nutrients around that workout to drive that adaptation. So if you're just skipping that entirely, but you think intermittent fasting is going to bring you over to here, it's probably not. So once we have all those foundational components, on the car analogy, then we can talk on the spoiler on the back, and then everything really starts to click and things go well. But again, some cars look really stupid with a spoiler on it. And so if we're sticking with our car analogy, for some people, it just doesn't work. Don't put a spoiler on, a 97 Corvette, and it's 3 feet off the back of the trunk. It probably doesn't look that great. But sometimes we can tweak this a little bit, and it doesn't have to be a really big spoiler. So maybe you don't have to have that 16-hour window or that 20-hour window. Maybe you have that 12-hour window, and it's naturally occurring because of when you go to bed and when you wake up. And maybe you don't eat as soon as you wake up. Maybe you eat at 9 o'clock instead of 7 o'clock. We push that window out a little bit, but you still feel good and you still get some of the benefits. So again, think about it in terms of that car analogy. Sometimes it just doesn't work for folks at all. Sometimes you just get a little spoiler and you can just tweak and change the context of that principle for your lifestyle. And sometimes you can incorporate all of it, but that's not the case for everybody.
Sure. I like it. My last comment was I put up that picture of my buddy Dale, military guy, the jiu-jitsu, made that big body composition change. And if you look at that, I don't think he made much weight change, but his body composition changed. And he did that. He told me he did that carb cycling. I did some carb cycling stuff with him. But what I really should now that I had this post, what I really need to comment on there is I need everybody to realize Dale didn't start with carb cycling. He learned how to eat. He learned how to lift. He got really good at that. Then he implemented nutrient timing within his day. He was already working at a high level. And then that last 10, 15% was nutrient timing, right? And that's kind of the same concept you're talking about. Hey, let's get the algebra down, or the addition and subtraction down before we jump into high level calculus. I like it. I think that's good.
Awesome.
I think people will like this.
It's a great chat. I knew this was going to be a good one. I'm excited. We got another one coming up. I think it's going to be just as good. So we'll drop that one on Mike here in a little bit. But again, thanks, guys. So look, if you got value here, share it. We're just starting out. We every little share helps us out. So if you're on YouTube, make sure you subscribe and share. If you're on any of the other podcast platforms, iTunes, Anchor, Google, all of the million different places we are now. I think we're on 15 platforms. Subscribe, share. We appreciate it. And if you haven't already, PhnmBrand Fitness and Nutrition, that we have a community on Facebook that's pretty awesome. And you can get dialed in and get some free workouts and talk to these guys and ask them questions. So it's pretty good. We'll see you inside. Thanks, Josh. Thanks, Mike. We'll catch you on the next one.
Yep, Mike, don't leave yet.
All right.